What happens when a nosy Ho board member picks a fight with a federally protected generator and loses in spectacular fashion? This is the true story of how one man's quiet resilience turned a neighborhood feud into a viral lesson in karma, law, and the power of staying calm while everything around you burns. Let's begin story. Point 1. The calm before the storm. They say the desert teaches patience, that its blistering winds and wide-open silence shape people the way the sand sculpts rock. For me, that desert was the edge of Mesa Solar, a quiet highland community perched between Arizona's rocky escarpments and sprawling canyons. I had moved there for peace, or rather, to build it from within. My name's Malcolm Reyes, and I work as a field systems coordinator for the National Disaster Response Corps and DRC, an agency not unlike FEMA, but tasked with maintaining the Southwest's emergency communications grid. My job isn't glamorous. When wildfires threaten towns, or sandstorms knock out power and cell towers, I help keep the backbone of disaster coordination standing. To do that, I rely on my most prized possession, a 2,000-pound, diesel-fed tactical generator, hardened against the elements and registered under federal emergency protocols. It hums like a beast, sure, but it hums for the right reasons. My new home in Mesa Solar had everything I needed: remoteness, elevation, and plenty of space to keep my unit secured behind reinforced fencing. My nearest neighbors were scattered across the plateau retires with tidy xeriscaped yards and solar panels, all united by their love of order and silence. But if the desert teaches patience, Karen never learned. Karen lived 3 houses down in a meticulously beige adobe rancher. Her windows were always covered, her lawn rake always in hand. She was the type of person who'd send an email to the Ho board if your garbage bins lingered 10 minutes too long on collection day. Her front garden was lined with identical clayalls and laminated signs warning about no-native fauna. I hadn't been in town 3 weeks before I received a handwritten note in my mailbox. Welcome. Please refrain from disruptive equipment usage between 9 a.m. and 6 p.m. We treasure our tranquility. I almost laughed until I realized she was completely serious. I didn't mind the strictness at first. Mesa Solar had its charm, and I preferred the quiet. Besides, I figured once Karen saw my credentials and learned about my role, she'd back off. After all, who argues with federal preparedness? Apparently, Karen does. Things came to a head one morning at 9:37 a.m. I was midway through a 90-minute systems check on the generator mandatory protocol ahead of a statewide fire drill scheduled later that week. My machine roared to life as expected. It wasn't subtle, no, but it was fully compliant. I had the permits, the federal tags, even an embossed letter from the NDRC detailing its authorization. I'd even notified the community chat a day prior, but Karen never responded. Instead, as I sipped black coffee on my deck, I saw the glint of sunlight off binoculars from her upper window. A moment later, her screen door creaked open and she marched outside in a flowing teal robe and sandals, her dog trailing behind like it had seen this before. Karen didn't march at clipboard in hand, lips pursed into a scowl that could wither cacti. My phone buzzed. One of my other neighbors, Jody, texted, "Brace yourself. Karen's on a rampage." I shrugged. What could she possibly do? The answer arrived 20 minutes later with sirens. I stood barefoot on my gravel driveway as two sheriff's SUVs and a fire truck pulled up to my address, lights flashing like I was a fugitive from justice. Karen stood beside them, arms folded, expression righteous enough to part the desert sky. I heard her say the words, clear as day, "He's running unauthorized industrial equipment in a residential zone. It's dangerous, disruptive, and illegal." The sheriff turned to me, hand on his belt. "Sir, can you explain the nature of the machinery you've got running back there?" That was when I knew this wasn't just a misunderstanding. Karen hadn't just overstepped, had declared war. And I hadn't even finished my coffee. Point 2: sirens, smirks, and the switch. There's a particular kind of silence that follows the wail of a siren. It's not peace, but tension, anticipation, like the desert itself is holding its breath. That's the silence I stood in as Sheriff Dalton stared at me, one hand resting on the butt of his radio, the other shielding his eyes from the glare. Behind him, the fire crew lingered near their engine, exchanging glances that said, "Why are we here?" Karen, meanwhile, looked like she'd just orchestrated a SWAT takedown. She had her robe cinched tight, her clipboard held like a legal sword, and a smile that said, I finally got you. I assume this is about the generator, I asked calmly, nodding toward the rear of the property. The sheriff raised an eyebrow. She says you're operating a commercial-grade unit in a residential zone, causing a public disturbance and potentially violating municipal codes. I didn't flinch. It's not just mine, I said. It's registered to the National Disaster Response Corps, fully permitted and designated as a backup node for regional communication in crisis zones. Karen's smirk faltered. I motioned for the sheriff to follow me. We walked around the side of the house, the fire chief trailing behind. There, behind a chain-link enclosure wrapped in mesh and signage, sat the generator cylinder now, its test run complete. I opened the secured hatch and showed them the panel-laminated ID tags, the NDRC seal, and a mounted plaque outlining the federal regulation codes under which it operated. This unit is integrated into the Southwest contingency grid, I said, pointing to a barcode. Cutting its power in an emergency would be like knocking out a hospital's generator mid-surgery. Dalton leaned in. And you've got proof of that. I handed him a folder with stamped paperwork and a letter signed by the regional director. He took his time flipping through it. Behind us, Karen had followed the group, and now she burst in with all the subtlety of a sandstorm. He's making this up, she snapped. I've measured the noise levels. My dog's been shaking for hours. This kind of industrial nonsense is not residentially zoned. There are laws, Sheriff. The fire chief turned toward her slowly, brow raised. Man, we respond to dozens of calls a year about generators. This one looks pretty standard. Karen turned redder than the New Mexico clay beneath her feet. I gave her one final glance, just long enough to make sure I had her full attention. Then I delivered the sentence that shifted the entire temperature of the air. Karen, I said, when you called this in, you didn't just report a noise complaint. You tried to shut down a node of the federal emergency infrastructure. That's obstruction under Title 44 of the U.S. Code. If this had been during an active deployment, you'd be looking at felony interference with disaster response. Silence. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. Nothing came out. The sheriff looked at her, then at me. He nodded once and said to his deputy, "We're done here." Karen's clipboard wobbled in her hand. "You can't just ignore this. There are rules. I'll take this to the hole. I'm on the board. I know what's legal." The sheriff turned slowly. "Mum, maybe let the professionals handle emergency management, calling fire and law enforcement for a generator test. That's misuse of services." She sputtered something unintelligible and stormed off, her robe flapping behind her like a cape with the dignity torn out of it. By the time the cruisers rolled off, the air was thick with quiet disbelief. One of the firemen gave me a casual salute before hopping back into his rig. I stood alone on my gravel driveway, coffee now cold in my hand, watching Karen disappear into her tin fortress across the street. It wasn't over. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. People like her don't back down, they double down. And sure enough, the next morning, the whole envelope arrived. Hot pink, signed by the board, and co-signed by Karen. Point 3. The paper war and the phantom inspector. The envelope was the color of bubblegum and just as artificial to bright, to deliberate, trying too hard to look harmless. I stared at it on my kitchen counter like it might explode. It was an official cease and desist from the Mesa Solar Hoa, citing unauthorized mechanical disruption, residential code violations, and non-compliance with neighborhood quiet standards. It demanded that I cease all generator operations immediately pending a formal board review. At the bottom, in a necessarily large typeface, were two names, Marilyn Penthechoe President, of course, Karen, co-signer, as if her crusade now had the force of law. I didn't get angry. I brewed coffee. Then I scanned the letter, attached it to an email, and sent it to my NDRC regional director and legal liaison. I included a note. Seems my neighbor believes local HOA codes override federal disaster infrastructure law. Advice. I didn't have to wait long. Within hours, I received a call from Director Fallon, my FEMA counterpart for the Southwest region. He didn't mince words. "We're escalating this," he said. "We'll send a response. In the meantime, do not engage directly. These people are playing games they don't understand, and they're now endangering continuity infrastructure." I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Again. 2 days later, while I was working inside on calibration logs, my perimeter motion alert went off. Zone 1 outer fence movement detected. I switched to the security feed and saw a man in a yellow vest standing at the edge of my property. He was holding a clipboard, wearing aviator sunglasses, and had a laminated badge on a string around his neck. I squinted. Something was off. The badge read Environmental Quality Inspector, but the logo was pixelated and the lanyard had Fiesta Days 2019 printed on it. His shoes were spotless. No field tech in Arizona has shoes that clean. I watched as he took out what looked like a toy gas detector, knelt by the generator enclosure, and began pretending to take readings. I stepped outside, calm but focused. "Can I help you?" He jumped slightly, then stood up, too quickly. "I'm conducting a preliminary environmental audit." Ho requested it. "Got a name?" "Dud," he said. "I starting. Just Dud. I work for a third-party compliance firm." "License number?" A pause. He didn't have one. I called his bluff. "You're on federal property," I said, nodding at the plaque by the generator. "This unit is tagged under NDRC's Disaster Response Act. Trespassing here isn't just red, it's a felony." Doug paled. "Two was just told to take some preliminary measurements." I pointed to the high-definition security camera above us. "Everything you've done for the past 15 minutes is recorded in 4K. I'd suggest you leave now." He left, quickly, almost dropped his clipboard in the rush. I watched him disappear down the road, then immediately called the sheriff. They sent a deputy, took my statement, and advised me to file a federal report. I did, and within 12 hours, FEMA's legal division issued its own cease and desist, this time addressed to the entire whole board. It warned of possible obstruction charges if harassment or misinformation about the generator continued. They didn't just send a letter, they sent a warning shot. Karen, meanwhile, was just getting warmed up. That same night, she posted a message to the community message board. "Thanks to vigilant residents and our recent inspection, we've uncovered serious concerns about illegal energy operations on our street, potential environmental damage, hazards to our pets and children. Updates soon." It was pure fiction, but to the uninformed, it sounded terrifying. She was turning fear into fuel. What she didn't realize was that her fire was creeping closer to federal dry brush and the winds were picking up. Point for shock therapy at 2 a.m. It was to 17 a.m. when my phone buzzed on the nightstand, dragging me out of a half-dream about windstorms and static interference. I blinked through the fog of sleep and read the alert on the screen. Security alert. Motion detected Zone 3. Zone 3 meant one thing: the generator enclosure. I sat up, heart suddenly racing, and grabbed my tablet. With a few taps, the infrared camera feed blinked to life. What I saw made my blood turn cold, then boil. There, in grainy black and white, was Karen. Not Doug, not some hired stand-in. Karen, in a hoodie 3 sizes too big, hair a mess, flashlight clenched between her teeth, and a pair of bolt cutters in her hands. She crouched near the gate, casting frantic glances around her like a cartoon villain trying to defuse a bomb she planted herself. I stared in disbelief. My fingers hovered above the screen. Should I yell, hit the alarm, call the sheriff? But then she moved. Slowly, dramatically, as if starring in her own spy thriller, she reached out and wedged the bolt cutters around the padlock on the gate. What she didn't know, she had absolutely no business knowing, was that the enclosure was equipped with a tamper-sensitive electrostatic deterrent system. Not enough to harm, but enough to educate. The moment the cutters bit into the steel, there was a pop, a bright blue spark, and a sharp crackle like a bug zapper going nuclear. Then, HHH. Karen yelped and launched backward with a force that surprised even me, landing squarely in a mud puddle left over from the afternoon sprinkler cycle. Her flashlight flew into the desert brush. Her clipboardies, she brought a clipboard, smashed against the fence and cracked in half. She scrambled on all fours like she was being attacked by hornets, swatting at the air, limping, muttering expletives. She disappeared into the shadows, tripping over a ceramic owl in her own front yard. I didn't chase her. I didn't say a word. I downloaded the footage, backed it up to cloud servers, saved it to a drive marked Security Incidents Level 1. Then I picked up the phone and called the county sheriff's department. The conversation was simple. "Hi, I'd like to report an attempted break-in and tampering with federally protected emergency infrastructure. Suspect identified. Video evidence available." By dawn, the whole street was buzzing, not just from the generator. A neighbor messaged me, dude. Karen came limping home at like 2:30. She looked like she fought a raccoon and lost. The rumors snowballed. Someone speculated she had been zapped by her own smart sprinkler. Another neighbor whispered about copper theft gone wrong. My personal favorite, aliens rejected her mid-abduction and dropped her into the mud. I didn't say a thing. I didn't have to. At 10:02 a.m., a sheriff's cruiser pulled into Karen's driveway. I watched from my porch as the deputy knocked on her door. Karen peeked through the blinds, cracked the door open, and immediately started talking fast, panicked, hands flying. The deputy held up a printed form and handed it to her. Her face collapsed in on itself. You could see the panic turn to shame in real time. Then the door slammed, the blinds snapped shut, and the porch light flickered off. Later, I learned the charge was misdemeanor trespass with intent to tamper, with possible federal charges pending under Title 18, Section 1361, destruction of government property. But for now, the real punishment wasn't legal. It was social. Karen had zapped herself straight into infamy. By that afternoon, the whole message board lit up with speculation. Someone posted a meme. Karen mid-fall, zapped mid-air, with the caption, "Unauthorized access denied." The dessert, it turns out, doesn't like trespassers. And neither does justice. Point 5 Fallout and frenzy. By midweek, the neighborhood had a new pastime, speculating about what exactly Karen had been doing at 2 a.m. with bolt cutters and a flashlight. Everyone had their theory. Everyone also had the video, no courtesy of a leak I didn't authorize but didn't mind. Someone had clipped the footage into a short reel and posted it on a local neighborhood forum. It had already reached a few thousand views and was circulating with hashtags like HoZapper and KarenGate. Karen, on the other hand, had gone completely silent. No walks, no whole patrols, no laminated notices on mailboxes about unapproved succulents. Her blinds stayed shut. Her trash bins mysteriously vanished from the curb. It was like she'd been abducted by the shame gods. But silence doesn't mean surrender. 2 days after her midnight misadventure, she returned digitally. The whole message board was suddenly flooded with posts from anonymous usernames like Concerned Nagbors and Desert I-20-5. The content: deranged screeds about electromagnetic contamination, brainwave disruption, and government mind control infrastructure disguised as power equipment. One post read, "They said it was a generator, but what if it's actually a frequency disruptor? No wonder people are reporting headaches, fatigue, and aggression. It's time we open our EYS." Another, "Wake up, the silence of the whole board is proof of complicity. There's something happening in our streets. Something humming." Everyone knew who it was. No one else posted like a sci-fi thriller narrator on a caffeine binge. I didn't respond. I didn't have to, because just 24 hours after that, FEMA's legal team looped in the Department of Homeland Security. The sheriff's report, the video evidence, and the HOAS documented attempts to restrict certified emergency infrastructure had pushed the situation to a new threshold. This wasn't just a feud anymore. This was now under federal scrutiny. The next morning, 2 black SUVs rolled into Mesa Solar and parked outside the whole clubhouse. One agent wore a FEMA windbreaker. The other had a DHS badge clipped to a tactical vest. They didn't knock. They didn't smile. They walked right past Marilyn Penth. HOA president though stood on the porch trying to offer lemonade and awkward charm. Karen tried to intercept them. Clipboard, walkie-talkie, that teal robe again. She stepped into their path like she was defending national secrets and said, "Excuse me, do you have an appointment?" The FEMA agent simply held up her badge and said, "Yes." They walked in. Karen didn't follow. Inside, the whole board was expecting a routine quarterly meeting. Instead, they got a 2-hour briefing on federal disaster infrastructure protocols, legal boundaries, and the real-world consequences of obstruction. It was calm, clinical, devastating. They didn't point fingers, but they didn't need to. Outside, neighbors began gathering in small knots. Some tried to pretend they were walking their dogs or trimming bushes, but their eyes were all fixed on the SUVs. I sat on my porch, coffee in hand, pretending to read. The hum of the generator in the background had never sounded so satisfying. By noon, word had spread like a brush fire. Karen had tried to confront the agents and had been told in front of several board members that she was under active investigation for trespassing and false reporting involving federal infrastructure. Someone posted on the message board. Karen isn't just in hot water, she's in federally regulated boiling water. Still, she didn't stop. That same night, I spotted a different man lurking near my property. No vest this time, but a notepad and a cheap gas sensor in hand. His badge looked homemade. His shoes squeaked on the gravel. I watched from the shadows as he made his way to the generator enclosure again. But this time, I didn't even confront him. I just hit record. Point 6. Collapse of a queenpin. By now, it wasn't just a neighborhood feud, it was a cautionary tale in slow motion. And Karen, she was its unblinking, unraveling star. After the second phony inspector was caught and reported, another Craigslist freelancer with zero credentials and a broken gas sensor, FEMA sent an official cease and desist letter directly to the HOA. This one didn't mince words. It warned of obstruction of federal operations, defamation of emergency infrastructure, and continued harassment of a registered disaster coordinator. The phrase criminal liability pending was used. The board, which had once backed Karen's every petty crusade, now scrambled like mice from a burning burrow. Marilyn Penn stopped responding to Karen's group messages. 2 other board members submitted quiet resignations within a week. HOA newsletters turned suddenly neutral, filled with vague language about reassessing community guidelines in light of recent events. But Karen, she dug deeper. She started laminating flyers, actual, glossy, neon green flyers titled, "The Truth About the Generator Scandal." She passed them out during a community gardening raffle. Residents stared in disbelief as she handed them sheets filled with charts, grainy photos, and what she claimed were subsonic wave pattern diagrams. One neighbor quietly recorded her ranting about electromagnetic mind control and uploaded it to TikTok with the caption, "Karen doubles down after zapping herself, still blames science." It hit 1.4 million views in 48 hours. By the end of that week, Karen wasn't feared anymore. She was a meme. Her meltdown had gone from HOA mail threads to Reddit's or Entitlement people, where someone even posted a side-by-side of her mid-zap and a Pixar villain in a lightning storm. The comment section was merciless. The final blow came during the next HOA board meeting, a special session called to discuss neighborhood concerns. Half the town showed up, not for unity, not for civility, but for closure. The clubhouse buzzed with uncomfortable energy. I sat near the back, sipping iced tea and saying nothing. The board president, now a nervous temp named Ron, opened with an apology for past miscommunications. He then addressed the elephant in the room. Going forward, all federally protected infrastructure will be exempt from HOA regulation, and any further interference will be considered a violation of law, not just policy. Someone shouted from the crowd, "You mean like trespassing with bolt cutters?" The room erupted with laughter. Karen, seated stiffly near the back in a sweater to sizes too tight and a pin that read neighborhood safety advocate, tried to stand. Ron cut her off. Due to ongoing legal matters, Ms. Karen has been advised not to speak at public meetings. The silence that followed was more devastating than any insult. One neighbor, a quiet veteran named Owen who rarely spoke, leaned over and whispered just loud enough for a few rows to hear, "Guess she's not running surveillance ops anymore." Everyone chuckled. That night, someone posted a photo of Karen's house with a giant nuclear cooling tower photoshopped in the background. The caption, "Let her protect us now." The next morning, her for sale sign went up. There was no goodbye, no explanation, just a moving truck, a few exhausted movers, and one final laminated sign duct taped to her mailbox. "Beware of radiation." It was gone by sundown. Point 7. The home that never left. The morning after Karen left, there in Mesa Solar felt different. It wasn't just quieter, it was lighter, like the neighborhood had been holding its breath for months and could finally exhale. No more cryptic flyers, no more midnight flashlights, no more HOA hysteria masquerading as community protection. Her house sat empty for a while, windows dark, porch barren. The ceramic owls vanished one by one, like they'd flown off in search of a less stressful porch. The motion-activated spotlight that once scanned the sidewalk like a prison tower remained broken, hanging at an awkward angle, an accidental metaphor for Karen herself. And me. I got a letter from the National Disaster Response Corps 2 weeks later. It was formal and direct, like everything they debut it carried weight. For maintaining operational integrity and public safety under pressure and harassment, you are hereby recognized for exemplary civilian conduct. Your efforts protected critical infrastructure and community trust. Enclosed was a small steel plaque etched with the words, "Resilience in the face of entitlement." I mounted it on the generator housing the same day. The humming behind my house, since a source of petty warfare, was now a badge of survival. It still rumbled during system checks, still clicked and roared when we ran drills. But no one complained anymore. In fact, they barely noticed. They were too busy enjoying the neighborhood again. The whole meetings shifted overnight. Transparent, collaborative. No more surprise citations about mailbox paint or aggressively decorative succulents. Someone even installed a suggestion box, which promptly filled with notes like "Please no more Karens" and "Let's keep the meetings burrito-themed." Then came the new neighbors. A black truck pulled into Karen's old driveway one morning, towing a trailer and two large dogs. Out stepped a broad-shouldered man in a veteran ball cap and a woman in combat boots, both wearing easy smiles and efficient movements. Later that afternoon, the man knocked on my door. "Hey, name's Derek. That's my sister Leia. She did counterintelligence for the Air Force. I used to wire comms for the Army. We saw the video. Thought it was badass." I blinked. "You mean?" "Oh yeah," he grinned. "That generator moment. Our CO used it in a safety briefing. Titled it 'How Not to Handle Federal Property.'" I couldn't help laughing. We hit it off immediately. Within a week, we were upgrading the fuel tank on the generator together. Derek even helped me bury a new signal repeater cable out back. Quiet, capable, no drama, and completely unbothered by the hum. Turns out, they had found Karen's secret cabinet in the garage after moving in. Locked. Inside, dozens of printed out emails, surveillance photos of neighbors' yards, hand-drawn diagrams of what she called electromagnetic influence zones, and about 20 pages accusing me of harboring a secret antenna for the Pentagon. Leia joked, "It's like if Alex Jones had a Pinterest board." They kept one map and framed it, called it Operation Neighborhood Watchlist. We laughed, but underneath the humor was something real. Release. The whole saga had started as a minor inconvenience, exploded into full-blown federal drama, and ended in exile. But what stood out wasn't the humiliation Karen suffered. It was that no one had pushed her. She had done it to herself. She hadn't been silenced. She had shouted into the wind so long and so loudly that everyone else just stopped listening. I didn't need revenge. I didn't even need an apology. I got something better: peace, backed by law, respect, and a humming testament to staying grounded. One night, Derek, Leia, and a few other neighbors sat around my backyard fire pit. The stars were clear. The generator murmured softly behind us like a guardian breathing in sleep. Leia raised her glass. "To fair warnings," Derek added, "and fried Karens." We all laughed at it cruelly, but cathartically. The kind of laugh you earn. Valuable lesson from the story. Standing your ground doesn't require aggression, just integrity, patience, and trust in the truth. This story is more than a humorous saga of a difficult neighbor. It's a powerful reminder that entitlement, misinformation, and obsession with control often collapse under the weight of their own extremes. Malcolm didn't fight Karen with anger or retaliation. He relied on facts, law, and quiet resilience. In a world where people often react loudly to perceived threats, this story shows that the most enduring strength lies in knowing your purpose, staying calm under pressure, and allowing reality to do the heavy lifting. In the end, the hum of justice is quiet but undeniable.